You think anyone's coming to save you, old man? The younger officer laughed as he lifted the hammer. Second swing caved in the hand-stitched leather seat of a $600,000 custom Harley-Davidson, a machine that had taken 11 years to build. And watching didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't say a single word. He just stood there in his faded leather vest up, both hands at his sides, watching them destroy the most beautiful thing he had ever owned. And he smiled. That smile should have terrified them. It didn't. That was their first mistake. And their last. If you've made it this far, hit that subscribe button right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what happens next will change the way you see power forever. Arizona heat that morning was the kind that sits heavy on your shoulders, the kind that makes every breath feel like work. It was a Tuesday in late September, which meant the impound yard on the east side of Cutter County was already baking by 8 in the morning. The chain-link fences cast long shadows across cracked asphalt. Somewhere behind the main building, a radio was playing country music that nobody was actually listening to. Jack Callahan had been awake since 4, not because he was worried. Jack Callahan hadn't lost sleep over worry in 30 years. He'd been awake because he was thinking, which was something entirely different. There's a particular kind of calm that comes to a man who has spent his entire adult life reading situations, mapping exits, calculating outcomes before anyone else in the room even realizes there's a problem. Jack had that calm the way some men have blue eyes or broad shoulders. It was simply part of him, deep and permanent and entirely invisible to people who didn't know where to look. He'd driven himself to the impound yard in a plain gray pickup truck, markings, no logos, nothing that would draw attention. He wore the same faded leather vest he wore every weekend. His boots were scuffed at the toe. His hair, gone mostly silver now, was combed back in a way that made him look like someone's grandfather on the way to a Sunday barbecue. That was intentional. Everything about how Jack Callahan moved through public space was intentional. He chucked front stuff. The clerk, a young woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, glanced up at him over the rim of her reading glasses. Callahan, Jack Callahan, I'm here about my motorcycle. In yesterday. She typed something. Waited. Typed something else. The Harley? The custom one? That's right. Okay. Officers Garrett and Meade are handling that one. Out back. She pointed toward a heavy steel door at the end of the hall. You can wait there. Thank you. He didn't wait. He pushed through the steel door and walked directly into the yard. The thing he heard was laughter. It wasn't the easy laughter of men enjoying a morning. It's the particular laughter of men enjoying something they shouldn't be enjoying. The kind with an edge to it, self-congratulatory and mean-spirited. The kind that sounds wrong the moment it reaches your ears. The second thing he heard was metal on metal, a sharp, deliberate impact. Then another. Jack rounded the corner of the storage building and stopped. 2 officers stood beside his motorcycle. One of them, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-30s who Jack would later learn was Officer Dale Garrett, had a short rubber-handled hammer in his right hand. He was holding it loosely, casually, the way a man holds a tool when he's not particularly concerned about being seen using it. The other officer, younger, maybe 28, with a patchy beard and mirrored sunglasses, was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, watching with the satisfied expression of a man at a carnival. The bicycle sat between them, or what remained of it. The custom hand-stitched leather seat, which had been produced by an artisan in New Mexico who charged more per square inch than most people earned in a week, had been slashed open. The foam inside was pulled out in chunks and scattered on the asphalt. The chrome headlight assembly, a piece that had been cast by hand in a shop outside of Nashville and taken 4 months to complete, was hanging sideways, its internal mechanism punched through. The mirror was gone entirely. The gas tank, painted in a deep midnight blue with a hand pinstripe eagle that had taken an artist 3 full days to complete, had a long dent running down its left side. Raised the hammer again. Jack's voice came from behind them, quiet and even. I'd put that down. Both officers turned. Garrett looked at him for a long moment. Then he glanced at his partner. Then he looked back at Jack. Like it is. You got documentation? Truck. I was told to come out back. Garrett smiled. Not a friendly smile. Well, we've been going through it. Checking registration numbers. The system flagged it. The system flagged it wrong, Jack said. I have every document. Original title. Builder's invoice. Transfer of ownership. The VIN matches the frame. All of it. We'll need to verify that. Verify it. I'll get the documents right now. Garrett shrugged. We might need to hold it a few more days while we process everything. The younger officer, whose name Jack didn't have yet, snorted. Actually snorted, the way a teenager snorts when a teacher says something he finds amusing. Jack looked at him. The officer stopped snorting. A few more days, Jack repeated, his voice unchanged. Those few days, what exactly happens to the motorcycle? Standard impound procedure, Garrett said. Standard impound procedure, Jack said slowly, as if he were turning the phrase over in his hands. Does standard impound procedure usually involve a hammer? Looked down at the hammer in his hand. Something crossed his face, quick as a shadow. Not guilt. Something closer to annoyance. The annoyance of a man who's been caught doing something he knows he shouldn't be doing, but who has also been doing it long enough that he isn't particularly concerned about consequences. Sometimes we have to inspect vehicle components, he said, destroying them by accessing them. Jack nodded slowly. I see. He turned slightly, just enough to look back toward the far end of the yard. 3 men in leather vests were standing at the fence line. Hell's Angels patches on their backs, arms folded, watching. They had followed Jack's truck from the highway. He'd told them to stay outside the gate. They had stayed outside the gate, but they were watching, and they were recording on their phones. And Garrett hadn't noticed that yet. Garrett hadn't noticed a lot of things. You need to come back inside and fill out some paperwork, Garrett said, his tone shifting slightly, taking on the particular quality of someone trying to move a situation along before it becomes something they have to manage. Sure, Jack said. Can I ask you something first? What? How long have you two been working this yard? Blinked. That's not your business. No, Jack agreed. He paused. I was just curious, sighed. At a scratched plastic table in a room that smelled of burnt coffee and old paper, Garrett slid a form across to Jack and clicked a pen open with his thumb. Vehicle registration number, your name, your address, contact information. Jack picked up the pen. He didn't fill out the form. He set the pen down flat on the table, parallel to the form, and looked at Garrett directly. I want to be very clear with you, Jack said. Not as a threat, just as a fact. That motorcycle is documented. The documentation is clean. The VIN is clean. Whatever your system is showing you, it's showing you something incorrect. And when that gets resolved, and it will get resolved very quickly, I want there to be a clear record of what happened to the bike while it was in your custody. Garrett leaned back in his chair. Are you telling me how to do my job? No. I'm telling you what I'm going to document. Is that right? Right. The younger officer, who Jack now knew was named Meade from the tag on his chest, let out a short breath. Sir, you're welcome to file a complaint if you feel... I'm not filing a complaint, Jack said. Complaints go to the sheriff's office. I'm aware of how that process works in this county. Something changed in Garrett's face. A subtle shift, almost imperceptible. Not guilt this time. Something more like recalibration. He was trying to read Jack, trying to figure out what kind of person he was dealing with, trying to determine where on the spectrum of troublemaker this white-haired biker fell. What does that mean? Garrett said. It means I know how the process works, Jack said simply. Fill in the blanks yourself. Garrett stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Meade. Then he looked back. We'll hold the bike pending verification. It could take 3 to 5 business days. In the meantime, you're free to go. Jack stood. He buttoned the lower button of his leather vest. One more thing, he said. What? The camera on the front fork assembly. Small one. Just above the engine housing. He paused. I want you to know it's been recording since yesterday afternoon, when the bike was brought in. Another pause. And it transmits to a cloud server automatically. Has been since this morning. He watched Garrett's face, It went very still. "You have a good day," Jack said. And he walked out. Outside the gate, the three Hells Angels were waiting beside their bikes. The one closest to Jack was a large man named Victor, who went by Vice for reasons that became clear the first time he shook his hand. Had been riding with Jack for 6 years. He had a face like a fist and a voice like gravel in a coffee can. And at that moment, he looked like he was working very hard to stay calm. "How bad is it?" Vice said. "Bad enough," Jack said. "Seat? Gone." Vice made a sound deep in his throat. "Tank? Dented. Headlight housing punched through. Gone from the left side." The man to Vice's right, a wiry man in his 50s named Franklin, who went by Frank the Plank because he was 6'4" and built like a piece of lumber, closed his eyes briefly. "That headlight was from Nashville," he said quietly. "Army Baird made that headlight." "I know," Jack said. Vice stepped closer, his voice dropped. "Say the word." "Oh." "Jack Victor." Jack put a hand on the larger man's shoulder. "Oh. Not here, not like this." Vice looked at him for a long moment. He trusted Jack the way men trust each other when they've been through things together that neither of them talks about. Trust. Earned trust. The kind forged slowly over years of riding together, talking around campfires at 3 in the morning, watching each other handle hard moments with grace. "What are you gonna do?" Vice asked. Jack looked back at the impound yard gate. "Nothing yet," he said. "I need to find out how big this thing actually is first." That night, Jack sat at the kitchen table of his small house outside Tucson and opened his laptop. No television, no radio, just the sound of a ceiling fan overhead and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. He opened the cloud storage linked to the camera on his motorcycle. The footage began at 2:17 p.m. the previous day, when the bike had been towed into the yard. He watched for 4 hours. What he saw made him set down his coffee cup very carefully. And he was, because it wasn't just about his motorcycle. In the footage, before his bike had even been processed, there was another motorcycle. Red one, older but clearly well-maintained, brought in 2 days earlier. And Garrett was there, and Meade was there, and 2 other officers whose names Jack didn't yet know. And he was. And they were working through that motorcycle systematically, removing parts, setting them aside in a way that wasn't inspection. It was extraction. They were pulling valuable components and setting them in a separate pile. Jack leaned forward. He rewound, watched again. Then he opened a fresh document on his laptop and started typing. He typed for 2 hours. When he stopped, he had 11 pages of notes. He read back through them once, then closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a while. He was 58 years old. He had spent 32 years of his life in federal law enforcement. He had dismantled drug cartels and political corruption rings and criminal enterprises that thought themselves untouchable. He had testified before Congress. He had briefed presidents in the Oval Office. He had shaken hands with foreign intelligence chiefs in airport lounges in countries whose names most people couldn't find on a map. He had retired because he was tired. He had bought the motorcycle because he wanted to feel something simple again. And the road. The uncomplicated brotherhood of men who rode because they loved riding. He had not wanted to do this again. He picked up his phone. He looked at it for a long time. Then he set it back down. Yet, he needed to know more. The next morning, Jack drove to the county courthouse and spent 3 hours in the public records office. He knew what to look for and how to look for it, which meant the clerk who helped him had no idea what she was actually helping him find. She thought he was researching property ownership. He was researching something considerably more dangerous. He found in those 3 hours changed the shape of everything. For instance, Cutter County had processed 847 motorcycle impounds in the past 3 years. 312 had been flagged for what the paperwork called VIN verification issues. Of those 312, only 11 had resulted in actual stolen vehicle charges. The other 301 had been released eventually, sometimes after days, sometimes after weeks. But 89 of the released vehicles showed documented damage upon release that had not been present at the time of impoundment. 89. Jack sat with that number. He wrote it in his notebook, underlined it once. then a second time. He drove to a diner on Route 9 and ordered black coffee and eggs he barely touched. And he thought about 89 motorcycles. He thought about the people those motorcycles belonged to. He thought about what kind of person doesn't fight back when their property is destroyed by men with badges. Usually one of two kinds. People who are afraid of what fighting back will cost them. Or people who don't know they have the right to fight at all. He thought about himself at 26, the year he joined the Bureau. He thought about why he joined. He remembered the exact conversation with his father on the front porch of their house in Pennsylvania, the summer after college graduation. His father, who had worked 30 years in a steel mill and had opinions about fairness that were bone deep and unambiguous. Jack, his father, had said, "The only thing worse than a criminal is a man with a badge who acts like one." Jack drank his coffee. He pulled out his phone. He found the contact he was looking for. He typed a text message that said simply, "Need to talk. Urgent." Not on this line. He sent it. He waited 8 minutes. His phone rang from a number he didn't recognize. He answered. "Mr. Callahan," said the voice on the other end. Jack hadn't heard that title in 4 years. It felt strange and familiar at the same time, like putting on an old coat you'd thought you'd given away. "Actor anymore," he said. "Old habits," said Special Agent Maria Vasquez, who Jack had mentored for 12 years and who now ran the Phoenix field office. "What do you need?" "I need you to run something quiet for me," Jack said. "Not official, not yet. Just background." "What am I looking for?" Jack said. "Garrett. Dale Garrett. And someone named Meade, first name unknown, both Cutter County Sheriff's Department. And while you're at it, I want anything you can find on impound operations in that county over the last 5 years." Pause, Jack. Her voice was careful. "Should I be concerned?" "About them?" "Very," Jack said, "very concerned." He hung up. He left a 20 on the table and walked back to his truck. The morning light was doing something beautiful over the desert hills to the east, turning everything gold and amber. On any other morning, he might have stood there, looked at it for a while. Not this morning. He had work to do. And somewhere across town, in an impound yard behind a chain-link fence, what was left of a 600,000 motorcycle sat in the Arizona heat. 2 officers who had laughed while destroying it went about their day without a single moment of concern. They had no idea. They had absolutely no idea what they had started. Because Jack Callahan had spent 32 years learning one truth above all others, a truth he had applied to cartels and congressmen and crime bosses who thought themselves beyond reach. Nobody is beyond reach. Nobody. And the quieter the man coming for you, the more completely he intends to finish it. Back at his house, Jack opened a drawer in his home office and removed a leather document wallet. Inside it were copies of every document related to the motorcycle. Original title, Builder's Certificate from Montoya in Albuquerque, who had spent 11 years and more hours than either of them had counted building the machine. Insurance documentation. Verification from a licensed assessor. Photographs taken at every stage of construction. He spread everything on the desk. Then he opened a second document, this one from his years at the Bureau. A contact list he'd maintained privately. Names and numbers of people in law enforcement, legal, and government across the country who he'd worked with and who owed him. Not favors exactly, but trust of a long career in federal service. He circled 3 names. Then he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead. He thought about the look on Garrett's face when he'd mentioned the camera. That stillness, that particular kind of stillness that Jack had seen on the faces of men who were guilty and who had just been told, for the first time, that the ground might not be as solid as they'd assumed. Jack had been reading faces for 32 years. That face had told him everything he needed to know. Wasn't just a corrupt officer acting alone. Was a man who had been doing this for a long time without consequences, which meant he had been protected by someone above him, which meant this went higher than 2 officers with a hammer in an impound yard, which meant this was going to be considerably more complicated than a single motorcycle. Jack folded his hands on the desk. He hadn't wanted to do this again. He really hadn't. But there are certain things a man cannot unknow once he knows them. Certain wrongs that once seen clearly cannot be unseen. And that at 26, and it had been confirmed at every point in his career since. Opened his laptop again. He began to build a file. The way he had built hundreds of files before. Organized, methodical, patient. Each piece of evidence in its proper place. Each connection mapped and documented. Outside, the Arizona afternoon burned on. Inside, in the quiet of a small house that most people would never notice, a retired FBI director, who looked like somebody's grandfather, rebuilt the mental architecture of an investigation, the way a master carpenter rebuilds furniture precisely, deliberately, and with every intention of making it hold. He worked until midnight. When he finally stopped, the file had grown from 11 pages to 37. He wasn't close to finished, but he was close to something. He could feel it the way a man feels weather changing, not seeing it yet, but sensing it in the shift of the air, in the particular quality of stillness before a storm arrives. Laptop. He went to bed. He slept deeply and without dreams. The real work would begin. The file on Jack's desk had 37 pages in it when he went to sleep. 6 the next morning. Before the sun had fully committed to rising, he was already at his desk adding to it. Sleep hadn't softened anything. It rarely did for Jack. Some men wake up from a problem, hoping it looks smaller in the daylight. Jack was not that kind of man. He woke up and the problem was exactly the size it had been the night before. Maybe slightly larger now that his mind had been working on it without him. He made coffee. He read back through everything he'd written. Then he pulled up the cloud footage again and watched a section he'd flagged around the 3:40 a.m. timestamp from 2 nights ago, when the yard was empty of people except for one figure moving between vehicles with a small flashlight and a canvas bag. Jack watched that figure for 22 minutes. Then he picked up his phone and called Vice, rang twice. Yeah, Vice's voice was thick with sleep but sharpened fast, the way a man sharpens when he's learned over years that early morning calls don't come with good news attached. How many of our guys have had bikes through Cutter County impound in the last 3 years? Jack asked. A pause. The sound of Vice sitting up. Why, how many, Victor? Another pause, longer this time. 4 that I know of. Maybe more. Tommy had his Sportster held for 2 weeks last spring. Danny R. had that whole situation with his Road King. Why are you asking me this at 6 in the morning, Jack? Because I need their documentation, Jack said. Whatever they have. But paperwork, anything they saved, I need it today. Jack. Vice's voice dropped. What did you find? I found enough to know I need more, Jack said. Get me what you can. And Victor, tell them not to talk to anyone else about this. Yet, he hung up. He drank his coffee standing up, looking at the wall where he'd started pinning things. Frantic was, not in a frantic way, in the organized, deliberate way of a man who has mapped investigations before and knows that what looks like chaos in the first 48 hours always has a structure underneath it, if you're patient enough and trained enough to find it. The structure here was starting to show its shape. Ugly. And Maria Vasquez called back at 7:15. She didn't waste words. That was one of the things Jack had always respected about her. She'd learned early that in their line of work were tools, not decorations, and you didn't use more than you needed. Dale Allen, she said, 8 years with Cutter County Sheriff's Department. 2 internal complaints filed, both dismissed. 1 citizen complaint, also dismissed. Performance reviews describe him as aggressive but effective. She paused. Effective. That word is doing a lot of heavy lifting in this file. Meade. Kevin Meade, 4 years, transferred in from Pima County. Clean record on paper, but Jack, another pause, and this one carried weight. Them are flagged in a Finsian's report from 18 months ago. Jack set down his coffee cup. Finson, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Federal, which meant someone at the federal level had already noticed something. Which meant a file existed somewhere, which meant this was not a local problem that had stayed local. What kind of flag? He asked. Lifestyle inconsistency, Maria said carefully. Of them. Deposits that don't match salary. Garrett bought a boat last year, just $62,000 on a county sheriff's salary. County sheriff's salary, she confirmed. Jack. Someone already looked at this and put it down. The flag is there, but there's no follow-up. No open investigation. It was noted, and then nothing happened. I felt very quiet. Who shelved it? Jack asked. That's the part I can't tell you on this line, Maria said. Jack. It's not nobody. He understood what that meant. It meant the protection went sideways, not just upward within the sheriff's department. It meant someone outside the county had an interest in keeping this particular set of officers operational and untroubled. Jack said, okay. Maria's voice carried the particular tension of a woman who wanted to say considerably more than okay but was choosing not to. That's all you've got for me? For right now, Jack said. Yeah, Jack. Her voice changed, went quieter. Please, I mean it. I'm always concerned. You haven't been in the game for 4 years. Things move differently now. Yeah, Jack said. I spent 32 years being careful. I didn't forget how. He hung up. He stood at the wall and looked at what he had. 2 corrupt officers. A financial investigation that someone had shut down before it became an investigation. A pattern of motorcycle impounds that didn't track statistically. A camera that had captured things it was never supposed to capture. And somewhere above Garrett and Meade, a hand, a careful, deliberate hand that had been keeping the lid on this for long enough that the men underneath it had grown comfortable. Comfortable enough to laugh while swinging a hammer at a 600,000 machine in broad daylight. Comfortable people made mistakes. Jack had been counting on that for 3 decades. He picked up his pen and wrote one word at the top of a clean page. Then he circled it. Then he wrote a question mark beside it. He started on page 38. By 10 in the morning, Vice was at his door with a manila envelope thick enough to need both hands. He came in without being invited, which was his habit, and sat in the kitchen chair he always sat in, the one closest to the door, another habit, and dropped the envelope on the table with the particular weight of something that had been collected with difficulty and anger. Tommy brought his stuff, Vice said. Danny drove over from Mesa this morning when I called him. Reached out to 2 other guys who had problems out there that they never talked much about. He looked at Jack across the table. He was. You want to know something that made me sick this morning, Jack? I called those 2 guys and told them what you found, and they weren't surprised. Neither of them, not one bit. Jack opened the envelope. Inside was a collection of photographs, repair receipts, insurance claims, and written notes that together painted a picture that made the quiet in the room feel heavier. The Sportster had come back with a cracked primary case, present at impoundment. The repair had cost $1,100. Danny's Road King had been returned with the right saddlebag bracket bent and the custom taillight assembly gone entirely. The taillight had been custom fabricated. It was irreplaceable. The other 2 men whose names Jack wrote down carefully had similar stories. Had come back from impound with his aftermarket exhaust system replaced by a standard factory unit. The other had never gotten his bike back at all. The paperwork said it had been auctioned. He'd never been notified of the auction. Jack spread everything on the table. Vice watched him work. He'd seen Jack work before. On different things, organizational problems within the club, disputes that needed managing, situations that required someone who could think several moves ahead of everyone else in the room. He'd always found it quietly remarkable how still Jack became when he was working. Most men get louder and more agitated as the stakes rise. Jack went the other direction. The higher the stakes, the quieter and more precise he became. What are they doing with the parts? Vice asked. Selling them, Jack said, without looking up from the paperwork. Custom components pulled from impounded bikes. It's a market. Parts of the right machine are worth serious money to the right buyer. No questions asked. Quiet for a moment. How long? Based on what I'm looking at minimum 3 years, probably longer, and nobody stopped it. Nobody who could stop it wanted to stop it, Jack said. He looked up. That's different from nobody noticing. Absorbed that. He picked up one of the photographs, Danny's Road King, the missing taillight, and held it for a moment, then set it down carefully. What are you going to do? I'm going to build a case, Jack said. Right way. Clean, documented, airtight, and then it goes where it needs to go. Vice looked at him steadily. You're going to make the call. It wasn't a question. Didn't answer it as one. Not yet. I need more first. How much more enough that when it lands once and it lands completely. Jack straightened the papers into a neat stack. Thing you can do with something like this is move too fast. Iranians, you show your hand before you have everything, and the people at the top have time to distance themselves. Else get lost. Evidence disappears. Witnesses suddenly remember things differently. Nodded slowly. And the people at the top walk. The people at the top always walk, Jack said. Unless you do it right. There was a particular silence between them. After that settles when two men who have both seen what the world actually looks like underneath the surface of the way it's supposed to work, because recognize each other's understanding. Then Vi said quietly, how much of your old world do you still have, Jack? He was. The Catan, the access. Jack looked at the wall where his notes were pinned. Enough, he said. And the way he said it made Vi's lean back in his chair because it sounded less like reassurance and more like the quiet certainty of a man who is measuring a distance he's walked before. He left an hour later. Jack locked the door and went back to work. 2 p.m. He had made 11 phone calls. He had spoken to a federal prosecutor in Phoenix he'd worked with 15 years ago, a woman who was sharper now than she'd been then, which was saying something. He'd spoken to a retired Finson analyst who had been trying to find a reason to revisit the flagged report for months and had been told twice by people above him to leave it alone. He'd spoken to a journalist not to give her anything, not yet, just to let her know that something was developing and that when it was ready, he'd come to her first. He'd also spoken to Ray Montoya in Albuquerque. Ray built motorcycles the way other men wrote novels. He had a shop outside the city that looked like a garage and worked like an artist's studio. And the machine he'd built for Jack over 11 years had been his masterpiece, the thing he'd pointed people to when they asked what he was proudest of. He'd heard what happened to it through the community word, traveled fast in the world of serious motorcycle builders. And when Jack told him the details, there was a long silence on the line. Dale Garrett, Ray said finally. His voice was very controlled in a way that communicated the effort of that control clearly. I want you to know I looked that bike up in my records this morning. I could rebuild it. Ray, not as charity, Ray said quickly. As a statement. Some things should exist in the world. That bike was one of them. Another pause. What those men did to it was not a property crime, Jack. Something else. Something harder to name. I know, Jack said. You're going to make this right. I'm working on it. Good. A pause. You know where I am when you need me. Jack thanked him and hung up and sat for a moment with the particular weight of that conversation. He'd built that motorcycle over decades in his mind before Ray had ever touched a wrench. It had represented something he didn't easily put into words, not just freedom, which was the easy answer people always reached for, but something more specific. The idea that after a life spent inside institutions and protocols and chains of command, a man could own something that was purely and completely his. Something that no bureaucracy had touched and no title had defined. They had taken that from him. He was not a man who dwelled on losses. He had learned early that dwelling was a luxury the work didn't allow. But he sat with it for exactly 4 minutes, which he counted before he closed that particular door and went back to the file. The personal part of this was finished. What remained was something else entirely. At 4:30 that afternoon, he drove to the Cutter County Recorder's office and submitted a formal records request for all impound documentation over the past 4 years. He used his own name. He didn't try to obscure it. He wanted Garrett to know. He wanted whoever was above Garrett to know. Not because he was being reckless, but because he understood pressure, how it worked, how it moved through a system. When guilty men know they're being looked at, they make decisions, anxious decisions, and anxious decisions leave track. The clerk at the records office took his request and typed in his information and then paused, looked at the screen, typed something else, then looked up. Callahan, this is going to be a large pull. It might take a few days. That's fine, Jack said. Do you want us to notify someone when it's ready? Correctly, Jack said, and gave her his cell number. She wrote it down. As he turned to leave, she said, "Are you sorry? This is probably a silly question. You related to John Callahan? The one who was FBI director?" Jack stopped, turned back. "Why do you ask?" She seemed slightly embarrassed. "I saw your name in the system, and I'm sorry. Probably a common name." "It's not a silly question," Jack said. "Have a good afternoon." He walked out. He'd gotten halfway to his truck when his phone buzzed. A text from Maria. 2 words, "Check your email." He sat in the truck and opened the email on his phone. An address he didn't recognize, but the content told him immediately that it was from someone inside the Seant East who knew what they were doing. No names, no identifying information, just a list. 12 names, 12 addresses, 12 case numbers. Residents of Cutter County. Motorcycle owners. All of whom file informal complaints, not official reports, informal complaints. The kind that get taken down in notebooks and filed away and never processed about damage to vehicles during impound. 12 people, all of whom had been quietly told that their complaints didn't meet the threshold for formal review. All of whom had been told this by the same person. Jack looked at the name attached to those dismissals. He looked at it for a long time. Then he typed a reply to Maria's email. 3 words. "Got it. Thank you." He set the phone on the passenger seat and drove back toward the highway. Listen, the name at the bottom of those dismissals was not Garrett. It was not Meade. It was not anyone he'd yet connected to the impound yard directly. It was a name that belonged to someone sitting considerably higher in the county power structure, someone who wore a suit to work and shook hands at civic events and had very likely never touched a single motorcycle with his own hands. His signature was on every dismissal. 12 of them, 3 years, which meant he knew, had known from the beginning, had made a choice, repeatedly, to let it continue. Jack turned onto the highway toward home, and for the first time since this had started, he felt something that he recognized as the particular kind of satisfaction that had nothing to do with pleasure. The kind that comes when the shape of a thing finally declares itself fully, when the edges that had been blurry resolve into something clear and hard and complete. He had what he needed to make the call, not the call to Maria. That was infrastructure. That was the professional machinery of an investigation that would now proceed on its own momentum. The other call, the one that would end this. He got home at dusk. He fed the dog he'd rescued 2 years ago from a highway median, a scarred brown mutt named Chester, who had absolutely no idea what his owner did for a living and loved him with total uncomplicated devotion. He made a sandwich he didn't particularly taste. He sat in the living room for a while with Chester's head on his knee and thought about 32 years of work and what it meant that the same patterns he'd spent a career fighting were still here in a county in Arizona, wearing badges and laughing while they swung hammers. Some things he thought never change, which is exactly why some people never stop. He picked up the phone. He dialed a number he'd memorized and never written down, the number of a man whose name he wouldn't say on any line he didn't control. A man who was still inside the bureau. A man who owed Jack Callahan a debt that no amount of time had expired. Rang once. "I was wondering when you'd call," the man said. He'd clearly seen the number. "I need this to be official," Jack said. "Not county, not state, federal from the beginning." "How solid is it?" 37 pages of documentation, camera footage from the impound yard across 2 days, financial inconsistency flags in FinCEN that were buried, 12 dismissed civilian complaints with the same signature, 4 corroborating victims with documentation. He paused. "And I haven't made a formal records request that gets ignored yet, but I expect that to happen by end of day tomorrow." Silence on the other end. Then Jack. "Who else knows about this?" "Nobody who would move on it without me." "Good." Another pause. "Send me what you have encrypted. I'll have 2 agents in Phoenix looking at this by morning." "There's one more thing," Jack said. What? The dismissals. 12 of them. Same signature. He said the name. A long silence. Are you certain? The man asked. I'm looking at the documents. The silence stretched long enough that Jack checked the line to make sure it was still connected. No, the man said finally. His voice had changed. Flatter, more deliberate. The way voices go when the situation has just expanded beyond where the speaker expected it to go. Okay, Jack. I'll handle this personally. I know you will, Jack said. He hung up. Chester lifted his head from Jack's knee and looked at him with the particular expression of a dog who knows something has shifted, who reads the change in a person's breathing or the set of their shoulders or some signal entirely beyond human articulation. It's all right, Jack told him. Go back to sleep. Or put his head back down. Jack sat in the quiet for a long time, not celebrating. He had never celebrated at this stage. There was nothing to celebrate yet. Only the machinery set in motion, only the long, careful work of official process beginning its turn. He had seen this moment in dozens of investigations, and he knew what it meant and what it didn't mean. It meant the beginning of the end. It did not mean the end. And still so much that could go wrong. Evidence could be challenged. Witnesses could be pressured. The man whose signature was on those dismissals had resources and connections, and the presumption of respectability that had protected him this far. But Jack had 32 years of knowing how to make things stick. And he was not tired anymore. That was the thing he noticed sitting there in his living room with his dog. 3 days ago, he'd been tired in a way that had settled into his bones. The deep tiredness of a man who has given everything to a thing and walked away and found that the distance from it brings relief, but also an unexpected kind of emptiness. He had filled that emptiness with the road and the brotherhood and the motorcycle that Ray had built him. They had taken the motorcycle. They had not taken 32 years of knowing exactly how this worked. He reached over to the side table and picked up a photograph that sat there in a plain frame. It was taken 6 years ago, the day he'd first ridden with the Hells Angels chapter, a weekend run through the California coast. 13 men on 14 machines and the ocean on one side and the sky above. He was in the back of the photo, almost out of frame, his face half turned toward something one of the other riders had said. He was laughing. Genuinely, fully. The kind of laugh that a man produces when he has forgotten, just for a moment, all of the weight of what he carries. He looked at that photograph for a long time. Then he set it down. Then he went to bed. Tomorrow the federal agents would begin their work. The records request at the county recorder's office would either be processed or it would be stalled, and either outcome told him something. Tomorrow Garrett and Meade would go to work at the impound yard without knowing that the ground under their feet had been compromised in a way that would not be recovered. 2 men with a hammer had walked into a situation they could not see clearly. The quiet man they had laughed at had spent 32 years learning to see exactly this kind of situation more clearly than the people inside it. He slept. And in the silence of a small house in Arizona, these 7 pages of documentation sat on a desk, and a camera's cloud storage held footage that 2 officers had no idea existed, and a telephone call had been made that could not be unmade, and an investigation that had already begun was now quietly, inevitably, beginning in earnest. The clock was running, and Jack Callahan had never lost a case that he'd built with this much care. Not once, not in 32 years. The federal agents arrived in Phoenix on a Thursday morning, and by Thursday afternoon they had already made 3 mistakes that Jack had to correct before they made a 4th. Because Maria called him at 2:15 with the particular strained patience in her voice that she reserved her for situations where she was managing something she hadn't anticipated. They want to go to the yard, she said today. They want to do a visual inspection. Was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. No, I told them that. He was. What did they say? They said they wanted to move fast before evidence was disturbed. The evidence is already in a cloud server in my living room, Jack said. If they walk into that yard today, Garrett knows within the hour that this is federal. The moment Garrett knows it's federal, whoever is above him knows it's federal. And the moment that happens, 3 things occur simultaneously. Documents get shredded. Hard drives get wiped. And a lawyer appears so fast it'll make your head spin. He paused. Tell them to sit down and read what I sent. A pause on Maria's end. These are federal agents. I can't exactly tell them to sit down. Maria, who taught you how to run a surveillance operation without burning it before you had what you needed? Short pause. You did. Tell them to sit down and read what I sent. Hung up. He assumed she handled it. He didn't hear back for 2 hours, which he took as a good sign because it meant they were reading. He spent those 2 hours at his kitchen table with the victim's files spread before him. He'd been thinking about the 12 people whose complaints had been dismissed, and the 4 members of his chapter who had documented damage, and the statistical pattern of 301 impounds released without charges but with no accountability for what happened during holding. He'd been thinking about them not as data points but as people. A man who saved for years to buy a custom machine that came back to him broken. A man whose taillight, irreplaceable, made by hand, simply vanished. A man who was told his bike had been auctioned without a single notification. These were not abstractions. They were people who had been told by the authority of a badge and the weight of institutional power that what had been done to them didn't matter enough to investigate. Jack understood, at a level that was personal and not professional, what that felt like. The moment in the impound yard when Garrett had looked at him and shrugged that particular shrug, the one that said, "You don't matter. You have no power here. Nothing you change is anything." He understood what it meant to the dozen other people who had stood in similar moments and had no 32 years of federal law enforcement behind them. Contacts, no cloud cameras, no file building quietly toward critical mass on a desk in Tucson. Most of them had simply absorbed it and gone home. The thought made something harden in him that was more durable than anger. Rang again at 4. It was not Maria this time. It was a number he didn't recognize with the Phoenix area code, and when he answered, the voice on the other end was clipped and professional and introduced itself as Special Agent David Holt. Mr. Callahan, Holt said. Agent Holt, Jack said, pause. The kind that happens when someone is recalibrating their approach. I've been going through your documentation. All of it? Another pause. I owe you an apology. I was going to push for a yard inspection today. I know, Jack said. Agent Vasquez talked me down. Good. Your file is Holt. Stop it again. I've been doing this for 11 years, Mr. Callahan. This is organized. This is very organized. Thank you. I mean it as a professional observation. Most civilian tips we get, even good ones, even from people who clearly know what they're doing, there are gaps. Yours doesn't have gaps. It has some, Jack said. That's why I'm not done yet. Holt was quiet for a moment. What are you still looking for? The buyer, Jack said. That come out of these bikes go somewhere. Someone is purchasing them. That's the thread that connects what happens in the yard to wherever the money ends up. I have the financial flags from Finson. I have the boat purchase. I don't have the buyer yet, and without the buyer, you can build a case for misconduct. You can't build a case for organized theft. There's a difference in what sticks. You think this is bigger than 2 officers. I think it's considerably bigger, Jack said. I want the evidence before I tell you how big. There was a long pause on Holt's end. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted into something more collaborative, honest. The voice of a man who has stopped trying to establish authority and started trying to get something done. What do you need from us? Access to the Finson report that was shelved, Jack said. The full report, not the summary, and subpoena power for the financial records on Garrett and Meade. And one more thing. What? The name I gave your supervisor. The man whose signature is on the 12 dismissals. I need to know if anyone else has touched him in the last 3 years. Any investigation, any inquiry, anything that was opened and then closed. A silence that lasted long enough to be meaningful. That's a sensitive ask, Holt said finally. I know it is. He stopped. There are relationships involved. Always relationships involved, Jack said. That's why the Finson flag got buried. That's why 12 people got turned away when they tried to file complaints. Relationships are the mechanism of protection. Agent Holt. Also, when documented correctly, the mechanism of prosecution. Another silence. I'll make some calls, Holt said. Thank you. Jack paused. One more thing. You keep saying that. I keep meaning it, Jack said. Don't put this on paper yet. Nothing formal. Nothing that creates a trail someone can pull from a shared drive. We move quietly until we have everything we need. You sound like you think we have a leak. I think I don't know yet whether you have a leak, Jack said carefully, which is the same as assuming you might. Do you understand the difference? Pause. Yeah, Holt said. Yeah, I do. They hung up. Jack looked at the wall. Chester looked at Jack. Jack added 3 new items to the file, cross-referenced 2 existing entries that Holt's information had connected in a new way, and then went for a drive. He needed to think, and thinking, for Jack, had always happened best at speed. He drove for 40 minutes without any particular destination, through small roads outside Tucson where the traffic was thin and the horizon was wide. And he turned the problem over in his mind the way he would turn a stone, looking at each face of it. He'd said it to Holt because it was true, but he'd said it with more confidence than he felt, because finding the buyer without burning the investigation was a problem he hadn't fully solved yet. For instance, custom motorcycle components weren't like cash. They had histories. They had provenance. They were recognizable in a community where serious riders and collectors knew their machines. The exhaust system missing from one of his chapter members' bikes was a one-of-a-kind fabrication. If it had been sold, someone in the custom motorcycle world had seen it. Frank the Plank. Franklin, he said when the man picked up. You know people in the parts trade, collectors, custom shops. Frank said cautiously, I need you to put out a very quiet question. No names attached to the question. No mention of the impound yard or Garrett or any of it. Just a question about whether anyone has seen a one-of-a-kind piece move recently. Unusual custom work, Southern Arizona origin. Frank was quiet for a moment. Johnny's taillight, or Tommy's primary cover, or the exhaust from Mike's bike, any of it. How quiet does this need to be? Very quiet, Jack said. The kind of quiet where if someone asks why you're asking, you say a friend of yours ripped off by a mechanic and you're trying to help him track it down. That's basically true, Frank said. Basically true is the best kind of cover, Jack said. Give me a couple days. You've got one, Jack said. Please, he hung up and turned the truck back toward home. That evening at 6:15, something happened that he hadn't anticipated. His doorbell rang. Chester barked twice and then went quiet, which was his habit when whoever was at the door didn't feel threatening to him, and Chester had turned out to be a surprisingly accurate judge of character. Jack looked through the side window before opening the door, and on his porch was in his late 40s, medium build, wearing civilian clothes that fit him slightly wrong, in the way that clothes always fit law enforcement slightly wrong when they're trying not to look like law enforcement. He was holding a folded piece of paper in his right hand, and he was looking at the ground, not at the door, in the way a man looks at the ground when he's working up his nerve. Jack opened the door. The man looked up. He was pale, tired around the eyes, in a way that went beyond one bad night. He looked like a man who had been sleeping badly for an extended period of time. Mr. Callahan, he said. That's right, my name is Brian Soto, he said. I'm a deputy with the Cutter County Sheriff's Department. He held out the folded paper. I think you need to see this. Jack looked at him for a moment. Then he stepped back from the door. Come in, he said. He made coffee while Soto sat at the kitchen table, because either of them particularly wanted coffee, but because the ritual of it gave the moment structure, gave the deputy a few minutes to settle, gave Jack a chance to observe him without observation being obvious. Soto was holding himself carefully, the way people hold themselves when they're doing something that frightens them. His hands were steady, but his jaw was tight. He kept glancing at the door, not suspiciously but reflexively. The way a man glances at the door when he is aware that what he is doing in this room would have serious consequences if discovered. Jack set a cup in front of him and sat down. How did you get my address? Jack asked. I looked up the registration on your truck, Soto said. I'm sorry, I didn't know another way. How long have you been thinking about coming here? Soto looked at him. Since your records request came through the office yesterday, so it had already reached them. Faster than Jack had expected, which meant someone in the county recorder's office had a direct line to someone in the sheriff's department, was itself information. What happened when it came through? Jack asked. Soto wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. The undersheriff got a call. I don't know from who, but within an hour, there was a meeting. Closed meeting. Garrett was in it. 2 other officers I can name. He paused. I wasn't in it, but I was close enough to hear. What did you hear? Enough, Soto said quietly. I heard them talking about how to slow walk the request, how to make documents unavailable, maintenance issues with the record system, that kind of thing. He paused again. And I heard your name. Someone said you used to be FBI director. He looked directly at Jack. True. It is, Jack said. Soto absorbed that for a moment. Then he unfolded the paper he'd been holding and slid it across the table. It was a handwritten list. Names, dates, and in the right-hand column, dollar amounts. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, the handwriting of a man who had been keeping records carefully over a long period of time. Jack looked at it. Then he looked at Soto. How long have you been keeping this, he asked. 13 months, Soto said. I didn't know what to do with it. I tried to talk to the undersheriff once, 6 months ago. He told me I was misunderstanding what I was seeing. He told me to focus on my own work. A pause. He also told me very clearly that officers who cause problems for the department tend to find that the department stops protecting them. Jack looked at the list again. The dollar amounts in the right-hand column ranged from a few hundred to several thousand, and the names attached to them were names he didn't recognize yet but would. The date 2 years went back 2 years further than the pattern he'd already established, which meant this had started earlier than his own file showed, which meant it was bigger than his own file showed. Mr. Soto, Jack said carefully, do you understand what this document is? Yes, Soto said. Do you understand what it means for you to have brought it here? It means I can't go back to pretending I don't know, Soto said. I've been pretending for 14 months. I'm done. He looked at Jack with the steady, exhausted gaze of a man who has made a decision he's been postponing for too long. My father was a cop, a good one. He would have hated knowing what I've been watching and staying quiet about. Jack nodded slowly. Can I keep this? I made a copy, Soto said. Copy is somewhere safe. Smart, Jack said. I'm not stupid, Soto said. I'm just scared. Being scared and doing it anyway is the only kind of courage that counts, Jack said. And he meant it. He'd seen braver-sounding men than Brian Soto fold completely when the actual cost of doing the right thing became real. Soto's hands tightened around the cup. What happens now? You go home, Jack said. You behave exactly as you normally would. You go to work tomorrow and you do your job and you don't change anything. Not one thing. He paused. And you give me a number where I can reach you. And then you let me handle the rest. Soto wrote his number on the edge of a napkin and stood up. At the door, he stopped and turned back. They're going to know it was me, he said. Eventually, yes, Jack said. They will. And I'll lose my job. Probably, Jack said. Because he wasn't the kind of man who offered false comfort to people who deserved the truth. You won't lose your integrity. And in the long run, in the very long run, that one is harder to replace. Soto looked at him for a moment, then nodded once, and left. Jack closed the door and stood in his hallway for a moment with the handwritten list in his hand. 14 months of records, names he didn't have, dollar amounts he hadn't been able to connect, dates that pushed the timeline back 2 additional years, meaning this operation had been running for nearly 5 years, meaning the number of victims wasn't 16. It was probably 40, maybe 50, maybe more. He went back to the desk. He opened the file. He added Soto's list to page 39 and kept going. He called Holt at 8:30 that night. Holt picked up on the first ring, which meant he'd been waiting. I have something you need to see, Jack said. A witness, said the department. Silence. Then how solid? 14 months of personal records, kept quietly, systematically, without being asked to and without anyone knowing. Names, amounts. Jack paused. The timeline goes back 5 years, David. Not 3, 5. He heard Holt exhale, not a dramatic exhalation, just the sound of a man releasing breath he'd been holding while he processed something larger than he expected. Is willing to cooperate. Carefully, Jack said. Protected. We protect him from the beginning, or we don't use him at all. Need, Holt said, without hesitation, which raised Jack's opinion of him. Need completely. What do you want to do? I want you to pull the FinCEN report tomorrow, Jack said. Full version. And I want you to cross-reference the financial data against the names on the list I'm going to send you in the next 10 minutes. Tonight? Tonight, Jack said. Because they know the records request is sitting out there, and they know my name is attached to it, and the clock on their willingness to do something stupid to make this go away just got shorter. Pause. Are you in any kind of personal risk here, Mr. Callahan? Jack almost laughed. David, I spent 32 years in federal law enforcement. I spent 4 of those years as director. I have been in physical danger more times than I can count with both hands and survived every one of them. Dale Garrett and Kevin Meade are not in the same category as the people who have previously wanted to cause me harm. That's not exactly reassuring, Holt said. No, Jack said. It's accurate. I'll send the list. He hung up. He photographed Soto's handwritten list and sent it encrypted to Holt. He sat back in his chair and looked at the wall and thought about what he had now versus what I'd had 4 days ago. 4 days ago, he'd had a destroyed motorcycle and 37 pages of notes. Now he had camera footage, financial flags, 4 victim accounts with documentation, 12 dismissed complaints with a singular authorizing signature, a handwritten internal record kept secretly for 14 months, a cooperating witness inside the department, and a federal investigation that had moved from informal to operational in less than 72 hours. He also had from Frank the Plank, who called at 9:47 p.m., something he hadn't expected to get this quickly. A shop in Scottsdale, Frank said. His voice was doing the thing it did when he was angry and controlling it. Custom fabrication shop. Guy who runs it isn't someone I know well, but a friend of mine knows him. He's been buying unusual one-off components for 2 years. No questions, cash. 2 pieces he bought 6 months ago matched the description of Mike's exhaust. A pause. And Jack. He's got a taillight in his showroom. I've only seen one taillight like that in my life. Tommy made one for Danny. One in the world. Jack closed his eyes for 1 second. Does your friend know you were asking, he said. He thinks I'm helping someone track stolen parts, Frank said. Like you told me. Don't call him again, Jack said. Don't contact the shop. Don't tell anyone else. Jack. Frank. I need you to trust me. A pause. Always, Frank said. That taillight is Danny's. It is, Jack said. And that means the shop in Scottsdale is the buyer. It means I now have the entire chain. The officers, the money, and the buyer. He paused. Give me the name and address of the shop. Then don't do anything else. Frank gave him what he needed. Jack wrote it down. When he hung up, he looked at the name of the shop for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and called Holt for the 3rd time that evening. Are you sleeping? Jack asked. No, Holt said. He sounded wired in the way that investigators get wired when a case is coming together faster than expected. That particular electric focus that good agents get when the machinery shifts from searching to finding. The buyer, Jack said. A silence so complete that Jack could hear a clock ticking somewhere on Holt's end. Say that again, Holt said. Custom fabrication shop in Scottsdale. 2 years of cash purchases, no questions asked. At least 2 pieces that can be matched to known victims. And a taillight that is, according to the man who built the matching unit, one of one. He gave Holt the name and address. Holt's voice was very controlled now. We have an entire chain here. Yes, Jack said. This is not a misconduct case anymore. Jack said, it's not. This is RICO territory, Holt said. Racketeer-influenced and corrupt organizations. Federal statute. The kind of charge that didn't just end careers. The kind that ended freedom. The kind that applied to organized patterns of criminal activity conducted by a group, which was exactly what Jack had documented across 5 years of sheriff's department records: financial inconsistencies, a systematic pattern of theft, a protected buyer, and a signature on 12 dismissals from someone who had known from the beginning. Jack said, "It is." Another silence. "How do you want to handle the next step?" Holt asked. "Simultaneous," Jack said. "When you move on the yard, the shop, and the money in the same hour. If you move on one before the others, the chain breaks. The people at the top have time to position themselves. That's going to take some coordination." "Yes," Jack said. "It's going to take some coordination." "How long do you need?" Holt thought about it. 72 hours to get the warrants right. Maybe less if the Finson cross-reference comes back clean tonight. "The clock," Jack said. "But David, one more thing." Holt actually laughed this time. A short, tired, genuine laugh. "Every time," he said. "The witness inside the department," Jack said, "and Soto, he is to be formally protected from the moment you file the first warrant. His employment, his safety, his family. I want his protection in writing before anything public happens," Holt said immediately. "Absolutely done." "Thank you," Jack said. Holt's voice went slightly quieter. "Can I ask you something that's none of my business?" "You can ask. Why are you still doing this? You're retired. You had a destroyed motorcycle, which is genuinely terrible, but you could have filed an insurance claim and moved on. You didn't have to build a federal case. You didn't have to do any of this." Jack was quiet for a moment. He looked at the wall covered in documents and connections, and the faces of people who hadn't known they had any recourse. 12 people filed informal complaints," he said. "They were turned away by the same signature. They absorbed the loss and went home because they didn't know what else to do." He paused. "I know what else to do. That's the whole thing, David. It's all of it." Holt was quiet. "Good night," Jack said. "Night, Director," Holt said. Jack started to correct him, and didn't. He sat at his desk for a while longer. Then he went to his closet and took down a box from the top shelf. He knew exactly what was in it. He'd carried it from every home he'd lived in for the past 4 years, never opening it, just knowing it was there. Inside the box, under an old service commendation and a photograph taken at his retirement ceremony, was his FBI credentials wallet, badge, the identification card, his name in federal print. He held it in his hands for a moment. He hadn't opened that box since the day he'd packed it. He set it on the desk beside the file. He didn't open it, but he didn't put it back either. He left it there, because in 72 hours, one way or another, everything that had started with a hammer in an impound yard in Cutter County was going to arrive at its conclusion. And Jack Callahan, who had traded his title for a leather vest and his government car for an open road, was going to be standing at the center of that conclusion. Not as a retired man who had suffered a property crime, and who had built the case that made it impossible to walk away clean. He had spent 32 years becoming that person. They had no idea. They still had absolutely no idea. The 72 hours that Holt had asked for turned into 51. Jack found out at 6:14 in the morning when his phone buzzed on the nightstand and Holt's voice came through before Jack had fully cleared the sleep from his head. "The FinCEN cross-reference came back last night," Holt said, "through until 4 a.m. Jack, the names on Soto's list match 6 separate cash transaction patterns flagged across a 2-year window. 6. And one of those names connects to a shell company that made 3 wire transfers to a business account in Nevada." Paused. And the pause had the quality of a man who has been awake all night looking at something keeps getting larger every time he looks at it. "The Nevada account belongs to a holding company. The holding company has 1 registered officer." Jack was sitting up now. "Who?" he said. Holt said the name. "Not Garrett. It was not Meade. It was not the undersheriff. It was not even the man whose signature was on the 12 dismissals, though Jack had thought it might be him. It was a name that Jack knew, a name from his years in the Bureau, from the edge of a case he'd worked 20 years ago that had resolved partially and imperfectly, as many cases do, some convictions and some charges dropped, and some people who had been peripheral enough to the established facts that they had walked away without charges and without attention and apparently without learning anything from the man's experience of coming that close to federal prosecution. He said the name back to Holt quietly to confirm he'd heard correctly. Yes, Holt said. Jack put his feet on the floor. Chester lifted his head from the dog bed in the corner, still dark. Jack reached over and turned on the lamp. He's been running this for 5 years, Jack said. Not a question. He was processing it aloud, mapping the new shape of things. Probably longer, Holt said. The shell company is 6 years old, still unraveling the earlier transactions. A pause. And Jack, this man has connections in the state legislature. He has connections in federal contracting. If he's been running a stolen parts operation through a corrupt sheriff's department for 6 years, this is not a sideline for him. This is infrastructure. This is a tested, protected system for moving stolen goods and laundering cash. With Garrett and Meade as the hands, Jack said. And the undersheriff providing institutional cover, Holt said. And the signature on the dismissals providing a second layer of insulation at the administrative level. He paused. It's actually elegant in a disgusting way. The people closest to the crime are the most exposed, and at the top has 3 layers of separation. Now, Jack said. Until now, Holt agreed. Jack, we can move. We have enough for warrants. I've already been on the phone with the U.S. office in Phoenix. They want this. Jack stood up. He walked to the window. Outside, the sky was the particular deep blue of early morning before the sun is committed, and everything was very still. He asked. 14, Holt said. The yard, the shop in Scottsdale, 4 personal residences, financial institution subpoenas, and 3 arrest warrants. He stopped. Arrest warrants cover Garrett, Meade, and the undersheriff. The man at the top, the holding company, were not moving on him simultaneously. We move on the bottom 3 and build the evidentiary chain up, Jack said. He won't get far, Holt said. A flag on his passport and a watch on his accounts within the hour of the first arrest. If we arrest him simultaneously with the others and the chain isn't perfectly documented, his lawyers will have him out in 48 hours and the case gets complicated. Jack thought about it. He thought about it the way he thought about everything in an active investigation, quickly, thoroughly, without the distortion of wanting a particular outcome, just the clean logic of what would actually work. Okay, he said, May 1st. But David, the moment the first handcuff goes on, the watch goes on his accounts. Already planned, Holt said. Can you come to Phoenix today? I want you in the room when we brief the team. Jack looked at the credentials wallet, still sitting on his desk where he'd left it 3 nights ago. I'll be there by noon, he said. He fed Chester. He showered. He put on a plain dark shirt and the kind of slacks he hadn't worn since retirement. Not the leather vest. Not today, because today required a different kind of presence. He picked up the credentials wallet and held it for a moment, then put it in his jacket pocket. He called Vice before he left. I need you to get everyone together tonight, Jack said. Not for anything confrontational, just together. My place, 9 p.m. Vice's voice was immediately alert. What's happening? Something good, Jack said. For once, something actually good. Pause. Then Vice said in a quieter voice than his usual register, Jack, are we close? We're past close, Jack said. We're there. He heard Vice exhale, heard something in that exhale. There was more than relief, something that sounded like the release of a tension that had been held for longer than just this week. The tension of men who have been targeted and disrespected and told implicitly and explicitly that their complaints don't matter and their property doesn't matter and they don't matter, and who have been waiting, without quite knowing it, for someone to prove otherwise. 9 p.m., Jack said. I'll explain everything then. He drove to Phoenix. The FBI field office occupied a building that looked like every other federal building Jack had ever walked into, institutional, deliberate, designed to communicate authority without being interesting about it. He'd been in dozens of them, had run one of the largest for the last 8 years of his career. Walking into one now as a civilian was a strange sensation, like returning to a school you attended decades ago, and finding that the hallways are the same but you are not. Holt met him in the lobby. He was younger than Jack had imagined from the phone, mid-30s, compact, with the slightly over-caffeinated alertness of a man running on less sleep than he needed and more conviction than he required. He shook Jack's hand firmly and looked at him with the direct, assessing gaze that good agents develop and never fully turn off. "Thank you for coming," Holt said. "Thank you for moving fast," Jack said. They went upstairs. The briefing room had 8 agents in it. A U.S. Attorney's deputy named Cora Simmons, who had the brisk, load-bearing competence of someone who had argued difficult cases and won them. A financial crime specialist named Torres, who had been the one to work through the night on the FinCEN cross-reference. Mia Vasquez, who caught Jack's eye when he walked in and gave him the small nod that meant she was glad he was there, and also glad he hadn't done anything that complicated her life. Jack took a seat at the table, not at the head. Off to one side, the way a consultant sits, the way a man sits, when he is there to contribute and not to command. And the briefing. He was good at it. Clear, sequential, unambiguous about what was established fact and what was inference. Careful to note where the documentation was solid and where it still needed corroboration. He walked through the entire chain, the impound yard, the components, the cash, the shell company, the Nevada account, the man at the top, and as he talked, Jack watched the faces around the table. As the financial specialist had the tight, focused expression of a person looking at a problem they understand completely and find genuinely offensive. Simmons was taking notes on a legal pad in a handwriting so small it was nearly illegible from across the table, and she hadn't looked up since Holt started talking, which Jack recognized as the behavior of a prosecutor who was already building the structure of charges in real time. Mia was watching everything and everyone simultaneously, which was her habit, the habit Jack had taught her. Holt finished. There was a brief silence. Then Simmons looked up from her legal pad and said, "The camera footage from the impound yard. Is it authenticated?" The cloud server logs show continuous upload beginning at 2:17 p.m. on the day of impoundment, Jack said. The metadata is intact and unaltered. The footage has a verifiable chain of custody because it went directly from the camera to the server without passing through any human handling. Simmons looked at him, not with hostility, with the evaluating look of a prosecutor checking the quality of evidence. And the camera was legally installed on a vehicle you own. No consent required from anyone else. Not in Arizona. The vehicle is private property. The impound yard is not a location with a reasonable expectation of privacy relevant to the camera owner's property. Simmons wrote something down. "Good," she said. One word. The way she said it had a particular finality to it that Jack recognized as someone who has just decided the evidence is going to hold. Then Torres said something that changed the temperature in the room. "The transaction I flagged last night that I didn't include in the briefing summary," he said, "because I wanted to confirm it before I put it in a document." He looked at Holt, then at Jack. The Nevada holding company made a payment 3 weeks ago to the usual accounts, to a legal services firm in Tucson. He paused. The payment was made 4 days before Mr. Callahan's motorcycle was impounded. Went very quiet. Jack felt something shift in his chest. Fear, recognition. "He knew I was riding in that area," Jack said slowly. "Someone told him." The payment to the legal services firm is consistent with retaining counsel in advance of anticipated litigation. Torres said carefully. "It could be coincidence." "It's not coincidence," Simmons said flatly. She'd stopped writing. She was looking at Torres with the expression of a woman who has seen too many coincidences east that weren't to extend professional courtesy to this one. Someone told him a former FBI director was riding regularly in Cutter County and that Garrett and Meade were his problem waiting to happen. Jack turned that over. Someone had known. Someone had known who he was, known his riding patterns, known that Garrett and Meade were the exposed link in the chain, and had what? Prepared a legal defense in advance? Or something else? Anything else in the payment record? Jack asked Torres. Any communication logged with the legal services firm? Not that we can subpoena yet, Torres said. We'd need a warrant for their client communications, and that requires a separate evidentiary threshold, Jack said. I know. He thought for a moment. Table it for now. Move on the arrests and the search warrants as planned. When the searches execute, we find what we find. And if there's communication linking the legal payment to foreknowledge of my identity, it'll be in someone's phone or email. Holt nodded. Agreed. Simmons tapped her pen on the legal pad. I want a media blackout until all 3 arrests are made and the searches are complete, she said. If any of this gets out before execution, we lose the element of surprise and we give the man at the top time to move assets. Agreed, Jack said. Mr. Callahan, Simmons looked at him directly. I want to ask you formally, on the record of this meeting, were you acting as a private citizen in your investigation, or were you in any way operating under federal authority? It was very still. Private citizen, Jack said. Early. My credentials have been inactive since my retirement. Every step I took was as a private property owner seeking to document damage to my vehicle, and in the course of that documentation discovering evidence of a broader pattern of criminal activity. He met Simmons's gaze steadily. I have been scrupulously careful about that distinction from the beginning. Simmons held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once. Good, she said again. Because the defense is going to argue that a former FBI director leveraging his contacts to initiate a federal investigation constitutes something other than standard civilian conduct. And I want to be very clear about where the line is. Is clear, Jack said. I collected evidence from my own property and my own public records research. Every federal step in this investigation was initiated by federal agents acting on information I provided as a private citizen informant. Nothing I did required a badge. Okay, Simmons said. She wrote something final on her legal pad and closed it. Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Simultaneous execution on all 14 warrants. Mac looked at her. Not 72 hours. Not anymore, she said. The prepayment to the legal firm changes the calculus. If someone tipped this man off once, they may tip him off again. We move tomorrow. Jack drove back to Tucson in the late afternoon with the particular quiet of a man who has set something large in motion and is now in the strange interstitial space between action and consequence. He had spent 32 years in that space. He knew its contours. He knew the way time felt different in it, simultaneously too slow and too fast, the mind running ahead to outcomes while the body was still carrying out the present. He stopped at a gas station 40 minutes outside Tucson and called Soto. Tomorrow morning, Jack said when Soto answered. Early. Are you going to be at work? A pause. He could hear Soto's breathing change. Soto said, my shift starts at 7. The activity will begin at 6, Jack said. You will not be in that building when it starts. Call in sick. Night. Do it before midnight. Family emergency. Whatever reason feels natural. Get out of that building before 6 a.m. tomorrow. Silence. Jack Bryan. He used the first name deliberately because this was not a moment for professional distance. You've done everything right. Don't be inside those walls when they fall. You have done your part. Let the federal agents do theirs. Long pause. When Soto spoke again, his voice was slightly rough. He said, okay, I'll call in tonight. Good. Jack paused. When this is over, and it will be over quickly, there are going to be reporters. Talk to any of them. Not one. Give me a call when they approach you, and I'll tell you how to handle it. Why do you? Soto stopped. Started again. Why are you still looking out for me? You got what you needed. Because you did the right thing when it was hard, Jack said. That doesn't stop being something I care about, just because the case is moving. He hung up and drove the rest of the way home. At 9 p.m., 7 members of the Hells Angels chapter were in his living room. Was in his usual kitchen chair. Frank the Plank was standing because he always stood in rooms that weren't quite tall enough for him. Whose Sportster had come back with the cracked primary case, was sitting on the couch with his forearms on his knees and his jaw set. Danny, whose taillight was currently sitting in a showroom in Scottsdale, waiting to be recovered as evidence, the corners, was leaning against with his arms crossed and his expression carefully neutral in the way that Danny's expressions were always carefully neutral when he was feeling something significant. Frank told them what was happening. Not every detail. The details that were theirs to know, that the evidence was solid, that warrants were being executed at 6 the following morning, that the people responsible for what had been done to their bikes and to the bikes of people they didn't know were going to be arrested by federal agents before most of Cutter County was awake. He watched their faces as he talked. Tommy closed his eyes for a moment when Jack described the scope of it. 5 years, dozens of victims. A chain that went from 2 officers in an impound yard to a shell company in Nevada to a man who had connections in the state legislature. This was never just about bikes, Tommy said quietly. Was it? No, Jack said. It never was. It was about people they thought they could hit, and nobody would care, Danny said from the wall. His voice was controlled, but his eyes weren't. Yes, Jack said, quiet for a moment. Then Vice said, "What do you need from us tomorrow?" Jack said, "Stay home. Stay off your phones until I call you. Don't go near Cutter County, and don't contact anyone who works there." He looked around the room. "When this is done, and it'll be done fast, you'll know. I need you out of it tomorrow. Clean, the way we've kept it clean from the beginning." Vice looked at him. "You've been planning this exact outcome since the day it happened." Not quite a question. Jack considered it. "I've been planning for the best possible outcome since the day it happened," Jack said. "This is it." Frank the Plank made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something heavier. "You know what's funny, Jack? We always knew you were smart. We knew you were the kind of guy who thought 10 moves ahead. But none of us ever thought about what that actually meant. Actually capable of. I'm capable of the same things any of you are capable of," Jack said. "I just have a different set of tools." FBI director tools, Tommy said. "Aye, but not unkind." "Retired FBI director tools," Jack corrected. "There's a difference. Everything I did as a private citizen." And he pushed off the wall. "The taillight," he said. "Tommy's taillight. Is it recoverable?" "It's in an evidence hold after the search of the Scottsdale shop," Jack said. "Which means after the case resolves, there's a process for returning property to its rightful owners." He met Danny's eyes. "I've already spoken to Simmons about it. She knows the provenance of those pieces. She knows they belong to specific people. That's part of the documentation." And he nodded once, slow. He looked at the floor for a moment. When he looked back up, his carefully neutral expression had cracked slightly at the edges in the way that a careful man's face cracks when something he has been carrying for a long time gets lifted. He said simply, just that. They left at 10:30. Jack stood in the door and watched the bikes disappear into the dark, and the sound of the engines faded, and then it was quiet. He went back inside. He sat at his desk. He looked at the credentials wallet. He opened it. The badge was exactly as he remembered it. The photograph on the ID was 4 years old. Slightly different version of the face he saw in mirrors now, a little less silver in the hair. His name in clean federal type. His title. He held it for a while. Then he set it down, open, on the desk beside the file that had grown to 61 pages. He tried to sleep. He managed a few hours. At 5 a.m. he was dressed and sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and Chester at his feet. And he was calm in the way he had always been calm at the moment before the conclusion of a long investigation. The calm of a man who has done everything that can be done and has released the outcome to the process. At 6:02 his phone rang. "Holt. We're executing," Holt said. His voice had the particular focused electricity of a man running a live operation. Rick is at his residence. Meade is at his residence. Undersheriff is Jack. This is interesting. The undersheriff is at the sheriff's office. He came in early. He knows, Jack said immediately. Someone told him something was happening. He went in early to get ahead of it. We anticipated that, Holt said. We have agents at the front and back of the building. He's not going anywhere. The shop in Scottsdale. The team is there now. They're going in. The residences are simultaneous with the yard, all executing in the next 4 minutes. Jack stood up from the kitchen table. He walked to the window. The Arizona morning was just beginning to show that light at the edges. He said. Jack. Holt's voice changed for just a moment, went slightly less operational. You should know, when we briefed the arrest team last night, I told them who built this case. Every agent on that team knows a retired FBI director built a 61-page federal case from a cloud camera and a library card. A pause. I just thought you should know that. Jack didn't say anything for a moment. Do your job, David. He said finally, I'll be here. He hung up, he drank his coffee. At 6:22, his phone rang again. Not Holt this time. A number he didn't have saved, which he answered because today was a day when unknown numbers could matter. Mr. Callahan, the voice was a woman's. Professional, controlled with the faint edge of someone who is maintaining control with effort. My name is Linda Garrett. I'm Dale Garrett's wife. Jack was very still. I know what's happening right now, she said. I know federal agents are at my house. I'm at my sister's. I took the kids last night. A pause. I want you to know that I've known for 2 years that something was wrong. I didn't know what. I didn't know how wrong, but I knew. Her voice broke on the last word just slightly. I didn't know what to do. Jack thought about how to answer her. He thought about it carefully, the way he thought about everything that mattered. Mrs. Garrett, he said, I'm not the right person to talk to right now. I want you to hear me clearly. What your husband did is not your responsibility. You didn't do it. Your children didn't do it. A pause. If you have information that would be relevant to the investigation, the right thing to do is call the FBI field office and ask for Special Agent Holt. He will treat you fairly. But make sure you have a lawyer present when you do. Silence. Why are you being kind to me, she said. My husband destroyed your motorcycle. He did, Jack said. You didn't. Another silence. Longer. Thank you, she said finally. He hung up. At 7:08, Holt called back. All 3 are in custody, he said. It went quietly. Meade actually ran out 40 feet out the back door before agents on the perimeter caught him. A pause. The undersheriff asked for a lawyer before we finished reading him his rights. Another pause. The Scottsdale shop search is producing 47 individual components so far, multiple of which match to documented victims. What? Jack said. The undersheriff had a phone, a second phone, separate from his work and personal phones. We found it in his jacket pocket. Holt paused. It has 1 contact in it. And the text history between that contact and the undersheriff goes back 4 years. Jack closed his eyes for 1 second. The man at the top, he said. 47 messages, Holt said. 47 messages that document, in their own words, the arrangement between the department and the shell company, including 2 messages sent in the last 72 hours. A pause. Them was sent the morning after the request came in. Sat down. Because this was it. This was the thing that didn't just build a case. This was the thing that made the case undeniable, undismissible, indefensible by any lawyer at any price. Has he been notified? Jack asked. The passport flag is active, and the account watch triggered 30 minutes ago. When we executed the financial subpoenas, Holt said. He tried to make a wire transfer at 6:45 this morning. Flagged and frozen. A pause. He knows it's over, and he hasn't run, because I think he's spent 6 years believing this day would never come. Comes, Jack said quietly. It always comes eventually, Holt said. It does. Another pause. Jack, I need to ask, do you want to be here when we bring him in? You've earned that. Jack thought about it. A long moment. Long enough that Holt waited without filling the silence. Oh, Jack said finally. That's your job. Do it the right way. I knew. Jack looked out the window at the Arizona morning, which was fully light now, the sky gone from deep blue to the particular clear, bright blue of a desert morning after a night with no clouds. I'm going to go for a drive, he said. He put on his jacket. He picked up the credentials wallet from the desk and looked at it one more time. Then he put it back in the box and put the box back on the top shelf of the closet where it had lived for 4 years and closed the closet door. He didn't need it anymore. He got in his truck and he drove out toward the open road west of Tucson, where the highway unfolds flat and long and the horizon is so far away it feels theoretical. And he drove with the windows down and the morning air coming through in Chester with his head out the passenger window and his ears back in the wind. He was not celebrating, but he was, for the first time in 9 days, simply driving. Not thinking about the case, not building the file, not mapping the connections. Just moving through the morning, in the uncomplicated way he'd come back to Arizona to relearn. His phone buzzed once. He didn't look at it. Whatever it said could wait. The road was there, and the morning was clean, and the long work of justice was proceeding exactly as it should. And Jack Callahan drove west into the Arizona light, a quiet man in a plain truck, invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look, carrying the particular piece of someone who has just spent 9 days being exactly who he spent 32 years becoming. The phone buzz Jack had ignored on his drive west turned out to be 3 separate messages, and when he finally pulled over at a gas station 40 minutes outside Tucson and looked at his screen, all 3 were from numbers he didn't recognize. He read the first one, then the second, then the third. He sat in the truck for a long moment with the phone in his hand, and Chester looking at him from the passenger seat with the attentive concern of a dog who has learned to read his owner's stillness as a signal worth paying attention to. The message was from a reporter named Carla Reyes at the Arizona Republic. She had somehow connected his name to the federal warrants executed that morning and wanted a comment. He didn't know how she'd made that connection in under 3 hours, but that was what good reporters did, and Carla Reyes had been doing it for 20 years. He knew the name. He set that one aside. The second message was from a blocked number. It said simply, "You should know there are 4 more counties. Same structure, different officers, same money at the top." The message had been sent at 7:19 that morning, 13 minutes after Holt had told him the undersheriff was in custody. Read it a second time, then a third. 4 more counties. He called Holt immediately. Holt picked up on the second ring. "I just got a message," Jack said, and read it to him word for word. Silence. Then from who? Blocked number. Someone who knew the arrests were happening and knew when to send this. Which means it's either someone inside the operation who is trying to trade information for consideration, or someone on the periphery who has been watching this for a long time and was waiting for a sign that someone was actually moving on it. Holt said. "Or both," Jack agreed. "David, I need you to run this up immediately. If this is accurate, this isn't a Cutter County problem. This is a regional organized crime problem that has been using the same playbook across multiple jurisdictions." "I know," Holt said, and his voice had taken on the quality Jack recognized from long investigations, the voice of a man who has just watched the horizon expand well beyond where he had been looking. "I know. I'm calling the deputy director's office in the next 10 minutes. "Good," Jack said. "And David, don't let the Cutter County case get absorbed into something larger in a way that loses the individual victims. The 47 components from the Scottsdale shop, the 12 dismissed complaints, the 4 men from my chapter, those are real people, and they deserve to see their specific cases resolved, not folded into a broader prosecution that makes them invisible." "I won't let that happen," Holt said. "Make sure it's in writing," Jack said. "Simmons will understand. Put it in writing." He hung up and looked at the second message again. 4 more counties. He thought about what that meant, abstractly, concretely. More impound yards, more officers with hammers, more people who had filed complaints and been turned away, more people who had absorbed the loss and driven home because they didn't know what else to do, and more Brian Sotos, sitting quietly on 14 months of records, afraid to move, waiting for something that might never come. He put the truck in gear and drove back toward Tucson. Not because anything required him to be there, specifically, but because staying in motion felt right. Because stillness, in this moment, felt too much like the silence before things are settled. The message had been from Maria. It said, "Call me when you can. Just want to make sure you're okay. Not everything." "Just you," he called her. She answered on the first ring. "Hey," she said. "Hey," he said. "Are you okay?" He thought about it genuinely rather than reflexively. The way she had asked the question made it clear she wanted the genuine answer rather than the reflexive one. "I don't know yet," he said. "Ask me in a week." A short pause. He could hear her smile through it. "Fair enough," she said. "Act what you did, what you built. In 9 days. Camera and a library card and 32 years of knowing how." She stopped. I just want you to know that I've been in this field for 16 years, and I have never seen a private citizen build a cleaner evidentiary package. Not once. I had good teachers, Jack said. You were the teacher, she said. He didn't answer that. Some things don't need answering. She said, feed the dog. Let us do the rest of it. Working on it, he said. He drove home. He fed Chester. He sat at his desk and looked at the 61-page file and thought about whether there was anything left to add to it. There wasn't. He had built it to the point where it no longer needed him, and that was exactly what it was supposed to be, a thing complete enough to stand on its own. The file. He stacked the pages neatly and put them in the manila envelope Brian Soto had never used. He sealed it. He wrote Holt's name on the front and set it beside his laptop. Then he went to the living room and watched 2 hours of baseball. He didn't particularly care about the teams playing. Rhythm of it was what he wanted. The steady, unhurried pace of a game that moves in its own time and doesn't care about anything outside the lines. Chester slept on the couch beside him. It was for a few hours almost normal. The normalcy lasted until the following morning when Carla Reyes of the Arizona Republic published her story. Jack had expected coverage. He had not expected what actually appeared. The headline read, Former FBI director built federal case against corrupt Arizona sheriff's debt from retirement 14 warrants, arrests, and a $600K motorcycle at the center. He read the article over coffee at the kitchen table. Had been thorough, in the way that good investigative reporters are thorough. She'd gotten the basic facts right, had connected his name to the case accurately, had spoken to sources he couldn't identify but could make educated guesses about. She described the camera footage, the cloud server, the records requests, the witness inside the department, the Scottsdale shop, the shell company, the Nevada account. She described the destroyed motorcycle in language that was restrained but precise enough to make the point without editorializing. She did not name Brian Soto. Jack read the article 3 times looking for any trace of Soto's identity, and it wasn't there. It had protected him. Whether by choice or by information limitation, the result was the same. The article did include, in the final 3 paragraphs, was a quote from Cora Simmons at the U.S. Attorney's Office confirming the investigation was active and expanding. And a quote from a spokesman for the Arizona Sheriff's Association expressing in the carefully neutral language of institutional crisis management full cooperation with federal authorities. And in the second to last paragraph, a single sentence that Jack read and then set his coffee cup down. The former director has not returned requests for comment, but sources familiar with the investigation confirm that Callahan's documentation was the foundational architecture of the federal case, and that without it, the operation might have continued undetected for years. He put the paper down. His phone was already ringing. With brief intermissions for the next 4 hours, reporters from 3 network affiliates, 2 national newspapers, a podcast he'd never heard of, and 1 call from a former colleague in Washington who said nothing meaningful, but whose voice communicated clearly that the people in certain rooms in certain buildings were paying attention to what had happened in Arizona. He didn't answer any of them. He answered 1 call at 11:15 from a number he recognized as a Washington, D.C. area code, and when the voice on the other end identified itself, he stood up from his chair. FBI director. Jack, she said. Patricia Osei, and she had been appointed 3 years after Jack's retirement, and he had met her twice at functions and found her to be exactly the right person for a job that was almost impossible to do well. I want to say something, and I don't need you to respond to it. Okay, he said. What you built in 9 days would have taken a field office 6 months to assemble, if they'd known to look, she said. And the fact that it was built by a retired director acting as a private citizen is both a testament to your ability and a significant embarrassment to the institutional process that should have caught this years ago. A pause. The Finson flag from 18 months ago. The inquiry that was buried, looking at who made that decision and why. That is a separate problem from the one you solved, and it is a problem I intend to address directly. Jack was quiet for a moment. Patricia, he said, there's a block number message I received yesterday morning. More counties. I know, she said. Holt briefed me last night. Looking. And the victims, Jack said. The specific victims of the Cutter County operation. I want to make sure they're not lost in whatever happens next. Simmons has it in her prosecution plan, OC said. Property restitution, formal apologies on record, and where applicable, civil liability claims against the county. A pause. I want to ask you something that I have no right to ask. Go ahead, he said. If we find what I think we're going to find in those 4 other counties and Jack, based on what Holt is showing me, I think we're going to find something significant. Would you be willing to consult? Formally, not as an agent, as a consultant, on your terms, at your pace. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she said, you don't have to answer now. I know, he said. I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking, she said. Take care of yourself, Jack. The country owes you more than it'll ever say out loud. She hung up. He stood in the middle of his living room and looked at the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead, the same one he'd looked at the night this started, rang awake, thinking about 37 pages of notes and 2 officers who had laughed while swinging a hammer. 4 more counties. He sat down. Chester put his head in Jack's lap, which was his solution to every human problem, and it was not a bad solution. Jack put a hand on the dog's head and sat there for a while. He thought about the leather vest hanging on the hook by the door. He thought about Ray Montoya in Albuquerque, who had called that morning. Jack had let it go to voicemail, and whose message, which Jack had listened to twice, said simply, Jack, I heard. I'm proud of you. And the offer stands. She'll ride again. Call me when you're ready. He thought about his father on the porch in Pennsylvania. This thing is a man with a badge who acts like said on a summer evening 32 years ago to a 22-year-old who was trying to figure out what kind of life he wanted to build. He thought about Tommy closing his eyes when Jack described the scope of the investigation. And he thought about Danny's carefully neutral expression cracking at the edges when Jack told him the taillight was going to come home. He thought about Brian Soto at his kitchen table, holding a coffee cup with both hands, saying, I'm not stupid. And he was, I'm just scared. And he was. He thought about the 47 components recovered from the Scottsdale shop, each one representing a person who had been told their loss didn't matter enough to investigate. He thought about Garrett's wife calling from her sister's house, saying, why are you being kind to me? Because you didn't do it. That was why. The answer was that simple and that complete. He thought about 12 people who had filed complaints and been turned away. He thought about what it cost them to walk into that office and try. The particular courage of people who don't have 32 years of federal law enforcement behind them and no cloud cameras and no contact list, only the fact of what was done to them and the belief, agile but persistent, that it should matter to someone. It mattered. He had made sure it mattered. His phone buzzed. A text from Vice News is everywhere. Chapter wants to know what you need from us. Whatever it is, name it. He wrote back, nothing right now. Sit tight, I'll call you tonight. Vice responded with a single word always. Set the phone down. He went to his desk. He pulled out a legal pad and a pen, and he wrote 3 names across the top of the first page. Not suspects, not officers. 3 names of victims whose files he had reviewed most closely, whose losses had been most precisely documented, whose cases were most clearly provable, in terms of specific property damage with specific dollar values and specific documentation of pre-impoundment condition. Danny, a man named George Palermo, 63 years old, whose bike had gone into impound in good condition and come out with an aftermarket exhaust system replaced by a factory unit worth a fraction of the original, and who had been told by the undersheriff personally that there was nothing to be done about it. Palermo had driven home and not spoken about it to anyone for 2 years. Jack knew this because Frank the Plank knew him peripherally, and Frank had made a call, and George had told Frank that he'd stopped riding for a while after it happened. Not because of the bike, because of the feeling of having tried to do the right thing, been told by the authority of a badge that it was pointless. Jack wrote George Palermo's name on the legal pad and underlined it. Then he called Simmons directly. She answered on the second ring. Mr. Callahan. Cora, he said, the restitution process. How does it work and how fast can it move? A brief pause, the pause of a lawyer shifting into a specific mode of attention. He was. For the property components recovered from the Scottsdale shop, we established chain of custody and provenance, match them to documented original owners, and process returned through the court as evidence is cleared. Depending on how the prosecution moves, that could be 6 months, potentially less if the defendants cooperate in exchange for consideration on sentencing. And for the property that can't be returned, the pieces that were sold before we found the buyer or damaged beyond recovery. Civil liability against the county, Simmons said, which is a separate process from the criminal prosecution, but which will be significantly aided by the criminal conviction. The county will want to settle rather than litigate. How significantly? Significantly enough, Simmons said, in the tone of a lawyer who does make promises about specific numbers, but whose tone communicates that the number will be meaningful. Ernst Palermo, Jack said. I want to make sure his name is in the specific victim's documentation. It is, she said immediately. All 16 documented victims are named. Ernst and Jack were still identifying additional victims from the evidence recovered at the shop. The number is going to be higher. How much higher? Preliminary estimate is between 30-40 additional, she said. Some of them go back further than we originally thought. If the 4-county tip holds up, the number grows considerably from there. A pause. Jack, this is going to be a very large prosecution. Make sure the individual cases don't disappear into the aggregate, he said. I know, she said. You've told me that twice now. I'll tell you again if I think it needs saying, he said. I'm aftly, but genuinely, fair enough, she said. Off the record for a moment. Okay. In 22 years of prosecuting federal cases, I have never had a civilian walk into a case with this quality of documentation. She paused. I want you to know that every victim in this case, whether they know your name or not, is going to get justice because you decided that the destroyed motorcycle wasn't just a property crime. Another pause matters. I don't say that often because it's usually not helpful to say it. In this case, I want it said. Jack was quiet for a moment. Thank you, Cora. Go enjoy your retirement, she said. At least for a few days. She hung up. He looked at the legal pad. Ernst Palermo's name underlined at the top. He made one more call. He didn't have Palermo's number, so he called Frank the Plank and got it. Said, what are you going to do? And Jack said, make a phone call. And Frank said, Jack, that man cried when I told him what you were doing. And Jack paused and said, get me the number. Frank gave it to him. Mo answered on the 4th ring. His voice was the voice of a man in his 60s who had spent his working life doing physical labor and had retired into a quiet that he protected carefully. Cautious on the phone with numbers he didn't recognize. Mr. Palermo, Jack said. My name is Jack Callahan. No, me. But I know Frank the Plank. A pause. Mentions you, Palermo said carefully. Said you were working on something. It's done, Jack said. Or the beginning of it is done. I want you to hear it from me directly rather than from the news. From the Cutter County Sheriff's Department were arrested this morning on federal charges. The fabrication shop in Scottsdale that was buying the stolen components has been searched. 97 pieces recovered, some of which will be matched to specific bikes. He paused. Exhaust system, we know it exists. We know it was sold. Whether it can be recovered depends on how the shop's inventory was handled. But your name is in the victim documentation. You are formally a named victim in a federal prosecution. What was done to you is on the record and will be answered for. A long silence. When Palermo spoke, his voice was rough in a way that had nothing to do with the phone connection. 2 years, he said. 2 years I stopped riding. You know that? Couldn't get back on a bike after that. Not because of the exhaust, because of how it felt when the undersheriff looked at me and told me there was nothing to be done. A pause, like I didn't count. You counted, Jack said. You always counted. The people in that department made a decision that you didn't, and they were wrong, and now they're accountable for it. He paused. Will you ride again? A silence so long Jack thought the connection might have dropped. Palermo said finally. His voice had changed. Steadied. Something in it that hadn't been there at the start of the call. Yeah, I think I will. Good, Jack said. You should. He hung up. He sat at his desk for a while, not working, not planning, just sitting. Chester had fallen asleep across his feet, which made getting up an act of commitment, and Jack found he didn't want to commit to it yet. He wanted to stay exactly where he was for a few minutes in the quiet of his house, in the ordinariness of an afternoon after a conclusion. Montoya called again at 4 p.m. This time Jack picked up. I heard it on the news, Ray said. They said your name. I know, Jack said. They didn't really explain who you are, Ray said. I mean, they said former FBI director, but they didn't, Jack. They didn't explain who you actually are. Listen, what kind of person actually does what you just did? I'm just a man who had a camera on his bike, Jack said. He made a sound that communicated clearly what he thought of that answer. Don't do that, he said. Don't minimize it. You built a federal case from scratch in 9 days, while the people who should have caught this years ago were looking the other way. Minimize that. I had help, Jack said. You initiated the help, Ray said. There's a difference. A pause, Jack. I want to start on the rebuild. I come down next week. Jack thought about it. Aim is in the impound yard, he said. It's still evidence. How long does that take? Depends on how fast the case moves, Jack said. Could be a few months. Could be longer. Okay, Ray said. Then I'll start on what I can start on. I've been thinking about what I want to do differently this time. He paused. Not differently because the first one was wrong. Differently because, Jack, 11 years is a long time. I'm a better builder than I was 11 years ago. I know things about that machine now that I didn't know when I built it. And the rebuild, if I do it right, it's going to be something neither of us has seen before. Jack was quiet. He was thinking about something he couldn't quite put into words, the particular quality of starting over on something after it's been destroyed. Starting over was ever actually starting over, or whether it was always a continuation, the new thing, carrying the history of the old one in its bones. He said, don't rush it. I never rush, Ray said, and there was a smile in it. I know, Jack said. That's why I trusted you with it in the first place. They talked for another 20 minutes about nothing and everything to build. A craftsman Ray had been working with in Santa Fe. A trip they'd talked about taking one day along the California coast. Normal things, human things. The kind of conversation that has nothing to do with federal investigations and everything to do with the fact that two men who respect each other have found a moment to just talk. He hung up. Jack felt something that took him a moment to identify because it was so simple and had been so absent for the past 9 days. He felt rested, not physically. He hadn't caught up on sleep yet, but something deeper, the particular rest of a man who has done what he set out to do. The rest that comes from completion, from the closing of a loop that has been open and pulling at you, sometimes quietly and sometimes loudly, as long as it takes to close it. He thought about Patricia Osisi's question, the consulting offer, 4 more counties, and whatever else the tip would unspool into. He thought about it carefully and honestly, and without trying to reach a predetermined answer. He said no. The part that had retired for good reasons. The part that had traded suits for leather, meetings for road. The weight of institutional authority for the uncomplicated brotherhood of men who rode because they loved riding, had made a life here. A good one that he had earned. Another part of him, the part that had been awake at 4 in the morning, not because of worry, but because of thinking, that had built 61 pages of documentation. Because once he saw the problem clearly, he could not unsee it. That part said something different. It didn't say go back. It didn't say put the badge on again. It said the work isn't done. And you know it, since he was. And you always knew it. And that has never in your life been something you were able to just leave on the table. He didn't have an answer yet. He was allowed not to have an answer yet. He called Vice at 7 that evening. The man picked up immediately. Chapter's been talking all day, Vice said without preamble. Nobody can believe it. Not the scope of it. We knew it was bad. We didn't know it was that bad. Most things are, Jack said. And when you look at them directly. Danny got a call from Simmons's office today, Vice said. Something about the taillight being in evidence, but potentially recoverable. He called me after. Jack, I have not heard that man's voice sound like that in a long time. Good, Jack said. Tommy wants to know if there's going to be a formal moment, something the chapter can attend, when the case wraps up, when the people responsible are sentenced. He wants to be there. That could be a year or more, Jack said. These things take time. Tommy will wait, Vice said simply. They all will. A pause. Then Vice said quietly, Jack, I want to say something, and I don't want you to deflect it the way you deflect things. And Jack said, we've ridden with you for 6 years, Vice said. We've known you as Ranger, as a brother, as the guy who always thinks 10 steps ahead and never raises his voice and scares the hell out of people without ever making a threat. A pause. We didn't know the other part, the 32 years, actor part. But Jack, knowing it now, looking back on everything I know about you, I'm not even surprised. The thing, I'm not surprised at all. Another pause and his voice went quieter. Because the way you are with us, the way you've always been with us, that's not a retirement version of you. The same man, the same way of being, the same values, whether it's a federal investigation or somebody's kid having a hard year or a breakdown on the highway at 2 a.m, he stopped. The same person in all of it. That's not common. Jack was quiet for a moment. He was looking at the wall where the case documents had been pinned. They were gone now, filed away, waiting to be delivered to Holt tomorrow. All was just a wall again. Victor, he said. Yeah, thank you. Don't mention it, Vice said. And the way he said it was the way people say it when they mean the opposite. When they mean this meant something, and we both know it. And we don't need more words than that. I'll call you this week, Jack said. We should ride. Yes, Vice said. We absolutely should. He slept deeply that night. No 4 a.m. wakefulness. No mind running ahead to the next step. Just sleep the way sleep is supposed to work. The body and the mind in agreement that the immediate problem has been resolved and the rest can wait. In the morning, the story had grown. 3 network morning shows had picked it up. A segment on one of them featured a retired law enforcement analyst discussing what it meant that a retired director had built a federal case independently. The analyst used the word extraordinary 4 times in a 3-minute segment. Jack watched 45 seconds of it and turned it off. He drove to Phoenix. He delivered the manila envelope to Holt personally. They shook hands in the lobby of the field office, and Holt held the envelope for a moment with both hands. Is everything in here? Holt asked. Everything, Jack said. And one additional page I added this morning. 3 names of victims I want to make sure receive direct personal contact from your office, not just a form letter. George Palermo is the 3rd one. Holt looked at the envelope, then at Jack. I'll handle them personally, he said. I know you will, Jack said. He drove back. 2 weeks passed. The shape of things became clearer as the investigation expanded. 4 county tip turned out to be accurate. Federal agents began preliminary reviews in Maricopa, Yavapai, Mojave, and La Paz counties, looking for the same patterns Jack's documentation had established. 2 of the 4, the patterns were present. The case was growing into exactly the kind of regional prosecution that Simmons had gestured toward, the kind that would take years to fully resolve, but whose opening moves were now irreversible and clean. The man at the top, the Nevada holding company, the shell accounts, the 47 messages on the undersheriff's second phone, was arrested on a Tuesday morning without drama. His lawyer released a statement saying his client denied all charges. The statement was 3 paragraphs and said nothing. 47 messages said considerably more. Brian Soto was offered a transfer to a Pima County position, which he accepted. His name appeared in no public reporting. He called Jack once, briefly, to say that he'd started sleeping again. Jack said he was glad. Soto said he was going to his father's grave on Saturday to tell him. Said that sounded right. They didn't talk long. They didn't need to. In the 6th week, something happened that Jack hadn't anticipated. A letter arrived. Handwritten. On plain paper, no return address on the envelope, from a city 3 states away, were 2 pages in a handwriting that was small and precise and had the quality of someone who had chosen every word carefully before committing it to the page. Was from a woman named Patricia Ann Hollis, 61 years old, that she had seen the news coverage and had, after considerable thought, decided to write because she had a story that might be relevant. Her late husband, Robert, had been a motorcycle rider in southern Arizona. He had died 3 years ago, not related to the impound situation. She wrote carefully, not wanting Jack to misunderstand of an illness, 6 months after an incident at the Cutter County impound yard. In those 6 months, while Robert was ill, he had tried to file a complaint about damage to his motorcycle during impoundment and had been turned away. He had told Patricia that the dismissal bothered him more than the bike, that a man in a uniform had looked at him and told him his complaint didn't meet the threshold for formal review, and had made him feel, in his last months, like he was invisible. He had asked Patricia, before he died, to keep the documentation he'd saved. He'd told her that someday maybe someone would do something with it. She had kept it for 3 years. She wanted to know if Jack was that someone. Jack read the letter twice. Then he sat at his kitchen table and wrote back by hand, because she had written by hand and it seemed like the right response to that. He told her yes. He told her that Robert's documentation would be added to the case file, with Robert's name formally attached to it. He told her that what Robert had tried to do mattered, that the impulse to report, to insist on accountability, refused to simply absorb the wrong and go home, that impulse had been correct and had been worth acting on, even when the system at that moment was arranged to stop it. He told her that the system was no longer arranged that way in Cutter County, and that her husband's attempt, even unsuccessful at the time, of the record now. He sealed the letter and mailed it. He called Simmons and told her about it. Simmons asked for Patricia Hollis's contact information. Jack provided it. Simmons called her the following day and spoke to her for 45 minutes. Patricia Hollis's documentation and Robert Hollis's name were formally added to the victim record. He was not invisible. He had not been for a long time, though no one had thought to say so until now. The day Ray Montoya arrived in Tucson with 2 cases of tools and a notebook full of sketches was a Thursday in early December, 10 weeks after the arrests. He drove down from Albuquerque in his truck, arrived at Jack's house at noon. Within 20 minutes, they were at the kitchen table, with coffee and Ray's notebook open between them, talking about the rebuild the way craftsmen talk about work, specifically technically, with the particular pleasure of 2 people who cared deeply about getting something exactly right, was still in evidence. Ray didn't need the frame yet. He had months of component work to do first, sourcing pieces, building to spec, improving on the original in the ways that 11 years of additional knowledge allowed. He would work as he always worked, without rushing. And when the frame was released, and it would be released, Simmons had confirmed, with the property returned to Jack as part of the case resolution, the frame would meet the components, and the machine would come together again. Different, better, carrying the memory of what it had been and what had been done to it and what had come after. Ray showed Jack the notebook, pages of sketches, measurements, notes in the margins. A new gas tank design that kept the midnight blue and the pinstriped eagle but refined both. The eagle's wingspan slightly wider, the pinstripe work more elaborate. New headlight housing, rebuilt seat, every piece informed by the original and better than it. You've been working on this since the day it happened, Jack said, looking at the notebook. Since the day I heard, Ray said. Yes. Jack turned a page, stopped at a sketch. The left mirror, the one that had been torn off in the yard, rendered in Ray's pencil, with a new mounting bracket that was both stronger and more elegant than the original. This is going to take you a long time, Jack said. Everything worth doing takes a long time, Ray said simply. Jack looked at him across the table. Ray Montoya was 64 years old, with hands that showed 4 decades of skilled work, and eyes that still held the particular quality of a craftsman who has never lost the belief that what he makes matters. The kind of person who is rarer than they should be. The kind that builds things to last and doesn't understand why anyone would do otherwise. Jack said. Why? Ray looked at him. He understood the question. Because some things should exist in the world, he said. The same words he'd said on the phone 10 weeks ago. He meant them the same way. That machine was one of them, and the man who owns it is one of them. He held Jack's gaze steadily. That's why. Jack didn't answer for a moment. Okay, he said. It was. Okay, Ray said, and picked up his coffee. They talked for 2 more hours, and then Ray went to the motel down the road, and Jack sat at his desk as the afternoon light changed and thought about what he had decided without quite deciding it. Patricia O'C's question, and the 4 other counties and the work that didn't end when the warrants were executed. Picked up the phone. He called Patricia O'C. She answered immediately. I'll consult, he said, on my terms, at my pace from here. I'm not going back to Washington. I'm not putting the badge back on. But if you need what I built in Cutter County, the methodology, the approach, I'll help you build it somewhere else. A pause. Those are acceptable terms, she said. She didn't dress it up, didn't express relief or enthusiasm in a way that would make it complicated. Just those are acceptable terms, which was exactly the right answer. Condition, Jack said. Name it. Every case we build this way, the individual victims are named. Every one of them. Not folded into a broader count. Named and specifically answered for, every single one, O.C. said. Then we have a deal, Jack said. I'll have Holt contact you Monday, she said. He hung up. He sat for a while. Chester put his head on Jack's knee. Outside, the Arizona afternoon was doing what Arizona afternoons do in December, cooling towards something crisp and clean, the sky going from bright blue to the deeper blue of early evening. He thought about something Vice had said. You're the same person in all of it. He had spent 32 years being a particular kind of person in a particular kind of role. And then he had tried this being that person, not because he didn't believe in the work, but because he was tired. And tired was real and had to be honored. The leather vest, the open road, the brotherhood of men who asked nothing of him but his presence and his honesty, those things had given him something back that the years in Washington had spent. He was not less tired now than he had been when he retired. But he understood something he hadn't understood 4 years ago. The weariness and the work were not opposites. They had never been opposites. They were the same thing, 2 sides of the same weight, and you didn't choose between them. You carried both, and the carrying was the life. He got up. He took the leather vest off the hook by the door and put it on. He went outside and stood for a moment in the cooling air, and he thought about 61 pages of documentation and a cloud camera and 32 years of knowing exactly what to do with what you find. He thought about Danny's taillight coming home. He thought about George Palermo saying, "Yeah, I think I will," when Jack asked if he'd ride again. He thought about Robert Hollis, who had saved his documentation because he believed someday someone would do something with it, and who had been right. He thought about the motorcycle that would come back to him, different and better, carrying its own history forward. He thought about 4 more counties. He went back inside at the desk. He opened his laptop. He began to write. Not a complaint, not a memo, not a records request or a case file or a formal evidentiary document. Just notes, the kind he made at the beginning of every investigation, when he was mapping the problem and letting the shape of it declare itself before the documentation began and before the machinery started turning. He wrote for an hour. When he stopped, each page of a new notebook was covered in his handwriting, names and dates and questions, and the beginnings of connections, and the familiar weight of a problem that needed solving was settled across his shoulders in a way that was not comfortable and was not supposed to be. Outside, the Arizona night had fully arrived. The stars over the desert were the kind of stars that remind you the sky is enormous and the problems of men are small against it, and important in spite of that smallness. Jack Callahan sat at his desk in a small house in Tucson, in a faded leather vest and plain boots, and he worked. Because some things should exist in the world, and was. Because some people aren't, in the end, simply who they are in every role, aren't, in every room, in every moment when it would be easier to look away. Jack Callahan had never, in 58 years of being exactly this person, learned how to look away. He had tried. He simply wasn't built for it. And the world on balance was better for that.